Welcome to Live Consciously with Nicole. I'm your host, Nicole Wenzel, and today I wanted to share a few things that are inspiring me lately creatively as an artist. I feel like I go through phases where sometimes I feel so energized, so excited and inspired to create my work, and other times I feel a little slow or I'm just sort of lacking that spark creatively. So whenever that happens, I have a few tools that I always go to that help me get out of any sort of creative ruts and get me reconnected to that spark of inspiration and that excitement, that passion for what I do. So today I'm going to share with you a few things that are inspiring me creatively. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about just the power of being in a new environment and how that can really help you as an artist in different forms. Specifically for me as a writer, it has been so helpful just to travel to different locations, to move to a new country. I mean, I know not everyone is going to move to a new country, but if you can even go on a small little day trip somewhere from wherever it is that you live, or even, just walk in a different part of your neighborhood you don't normally walk to. Like, it doesn't have to be this big crazy thing of moving to a new country or going abroad, but you can find inspiration in the most unexpected places if you just sort of stay present and open to it. And sometimes a change of scenery, whatever that might mean to you in your given circumstances, can just really work wonders. So that has been a huge help, and I'm actually reading a book right now. It's called The Writer's Journey, that is about how different writers throughout history have found their inspiration by going on trips, like voyages, journeys. And as I shared in my last podcast episode, I recently moved to Florence, Italy. So I'm in a completely new environment. I normally, before I was living in Southern California, so it's a pretty huge change for me. And one of probably the biggest I could have made. And so that in itself has just been interesting, because when you move to a new environment or you just go on a trip somewhere new, you meet so many new people who potentially could influence how you write characters as an author. So I was reading this book, The Writer's Journey, and it talks about all these famous authors. And one of my favorite authors of all time is Patricia Highsmith. And the past couple years, I've been getting just really into her work and really interested in who she was as a person as well. And she was really a fascinating figure, especially some of her work. She wrote certain work under pseudonyms because it was too controversial at the time. And so many of her characters and her work and the way she wrote influenced so much of the world of cinema as well. So she wrote the book Strangers on a Train, which became the Hitchcock film, Strangers on a Train. And she also wrote, I don't know which is more famous, they're both pretty up there. Probably for this generation, The Talented Mr. Ripley would be more of a famous example, but she wrote the character of Tom Ripley, and she wrote the book The Talented Mr. Ripley, which of course turned into this big film, and so many things that came from just that one character of Tom Ripley. And I think there were multiple sequels to The Talented Mr. Ripley and different offshoots of it. And if I'm not mistaken, there's a series right now. I don't watch that much on streaming services, so I'm just not super sure, but I'm pretty sure there's a show called Ripley, I think. But I haven't seen it, and I haven't seen any of the sequels. But I think that there's something really interesting about that, because I don't know if anyone else writes fiction who's watching me right now, but it's been really interesting working on a novel. So I've written a lot of screenplays, which are fictional, but what's been interesting is working on a novel and just going so deep on creating a brand new character in the world. And what I found really interesting about Patricia Highsmith and her process was how she came up with the character of Tom Ripley. And it was actually sort of a little bit based on herself and her own experiences of traveling in Italy. So she was traveling in Italy in Positano, and she saw this random man just walking down the beach. And when she looked at him, she was like, that's Tom Ripley. And she came up with this character, and he had characteristics that she wrote into this character that were loosely based on her. And it's interesting because she wrote in this era where there weren't a lot of strong female characters or controversial female characters at the forefront of fiction. And so I think it was really interesting. I wonder if she had been born in a different generation, if she would have written Tom Ripley as a woman, because it was so much based on things that she was experiencing that she felt like she had to put into this male character. I would just like be dying to ask her that question. If, I could, when they ask you like, what historical figures, living or dead, would you want to sit down with? Like Patricia Highsmith, I want to get inside her head. I'm so curious. So she also wrote this book called The Price of Salt, which was this like lesbian love story that was eventually adapted into the film Carol. And she had to publish it under a pseudonym because it was too controversial for her generation, and she didn't, she herself was gay, and she felt like she couldn't openly publish that book. But when she writes, or when she talks, I watched this documentary about her, and when she was talking about writing that book, The Price of Salt, so much of it was based on her own experiences of working in a toy shop, and she was the front desk girl there, and she had this real experience where she saw this woman that she found really interesting and striking, and she sort of dreamed up this scenario of what would happen if they went off together. And I think that's so interesting, how to get in the head of people's creative process and where it comes from and how people develop characters. So the book is called The Writer's Journey in the Footsteps of the Literary Greats, and it's written by Travis Elborough. And there are so many different authors in there, and it's so fun to just go through and get a sense of other people's creative process, because then I start to sort of like take notes from that. And then, when you're people watching, which I feel like so many people who are actors or directors or artists of any kind, we tend to be people watchers. Like, we'll sit in a cafe and kind of notice what's going on around us more than others, perhaps. And it kind of makes you take in the world in sort of a deeper way, because you're kind of like, and not in like a weird way where you're like, oh, is that going to be a character? But just where you're more receptive to what the universe wants to reveal to you or show to you. And I really believe that, I feel like sometimes you meet someone that's going to influence, a character you write, and that was sort of like a meant to be encounter. I believe that, at least. So that book has been inspiring me. I'm also working on writing a memoir style book, and so I've been reading a lot of memoirs, and I was so happy I finally found an English language bookstore in Florence, because what's been really interesting about moving to Florence from America, from California, is that you really realize all the things you maybe took for granted, like just being able to go easily to a bookstore and get a book that you want that same day. Because out here, I had to really hunt to find an English language bookstore, because everything mostly is in Italian. The place I found is called Paperback Exchange, and it's really in the city center. And in Florence, in the city center, you definitely find a lot more English speaking people, because there's so many like study abroad students and tourists and things like that. So if I need to sort of be around other Americans or English speaking people just to sort of fill that homesick void inside, I definitely go to the city center. And I was just so happy I found this little haven of English books, because I'm realizing just how deep my passion is for literature and writing and things specifically in the book format, because my background's been so in the film world that I've really, as I've gotten older, just gotten so much more into literature and books and just I think also living a quieter life now in sort of the hilly countryside of Florence. We're in Settignano, which is really up in the hills. So we're a little bit removed. We're surrounded by a lot of nature, but we're like 15 minutes from the city center. So just being in that sort of quiet, peaceful environment has been good to just go deeper with reading books and reading more complex novels and different types of memoirs and really studying, how some of these books have been put together, because as I am working on 2 books right now, and they're completely different styles. One is memoir, one is fiction. It's a humbling experience, because I've always been able to sort of take a blank page and write. Like, that hasn't ever been an issue for me. It's almost like there's not enough time to write down everything I want to say. But then when it comes to craft and structuring it in a way where I'm like, okay, let me prepare this for someone to actually read it, and thinking about the reader and the journey they're going to go on with the book, it's humbling to be like, okay, I need to read so many more memoirs, or just study this craft a lot more to feel truly confident putting this into the world. So I've been on that journey, and a big part of the writing journey is really reading a lot, a lot of things and a lot of different styles, and figuring out what you like, what you don't like, where you like this voice or you don't like this voice, or it's almost like being back in school. So going to this English language bookstore was so good for me creatively. I think I bought like 6 books. I just was like, I need all of these. I'm stocking up, so I don't have to come here like every day, let me stock up so I have a lot to sort of get through at home, and I can be, cozy and peaceful by the fire or in the garden and just enjoy a book, like really get lost in it. And it's interesting because I used to do that a lot when I was younger, sort of get lost in a book. And there was something about our modern world and social media apps and sort of this overload of content, and just how many different voices there are in the world, which in some ways is a really beautiful thing. It almost feels like media has become not like democratized, but just where it feels more in the hands of the people to create. Like we're kind of watching Hollywood crumble in a lot of ways, I feel like, and then watching the power go back into the hands of the people to really be like, what do we want to see? What do we want to create? Like there's greater access to being able to create content, and there's so much out there. But with that also sort of comes this like almost like attention deficit disorder, like this mass attention deficit sort of disorder where we're all sort of constantly pulled in a million different directions and our attention is quickly taken. And so I'm finding it to be really calming and peaceful to get lost in a book, and to kind of return to that. And that's been a big theme in my life since moving out here, is slowing down and just returning to a lot of the simple parts of life that aren't very like high tech. Probably the most high tech thing I'm doing is like recording a podcast episode. And, I've tried to make my setup as simple as possible for that. But, I've really been slowing down a lot and just spending time in the garden and time with books and time writing. And my husband, he's very private, but I do like to talk about him. Sometimes he loves to cook. So really having good home-cooked meals that are really genuine ingredients, which I struggled a lot with that when I was living alone, because sometimes cooking is fun, but I think because I'm a writer, I would just always rather be writing than like cooking, you know what I mean? So it was like this huge blessing in my life that I married a man who can cook. I highly recommend it if you're like me. And I think it's honestly one of the secrets to really happy marriages, because finding a man to just whose passion is cooking and he's just happy when he's in the kitchen cooking for you, that has been like one of the greatest blessings of my life, and I thank God for that every day. Thank you, God. So lately what's been inspiring me the most and kind of where my focus is on writing book-length projects, and of course I would love to one day turn those into films as well, but I'm taking it slow. So one thing that helps me with that when I'm writing, or my focus is on writing, sometimes exploring other mediums of art that I wouldn't say are my main medium, help to just keep that creative channel open. So my go-to is music. So I do play acoustic guitar and I sing, but I wouldn't at all call that like, my calling or my number one sort of art form. I mean, I don't think we need to rank our art forms or whatever. We're growing in all areas. But, I love that I can just pick up my guitar and start strumming and either sing a song I know or write a new song on my guitar if that's flowing in that direction. And it just sort of gets the creative channel open for me, where if I'm stuck, on a plot point, sometimes I'll just pick up my guitar and just play for an hour, and then sometimes that opens something up. Or going for a walk with my dog, or going on an artist date. So that word artist date, you may or may not be familiar with it already. It comes from a woman named Julia Cameron who wrote a book called The Artist's Way, which I think is a pretty famous book at this point among artists. But if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's one of the first books on creativity that I ever read. I read it when I was in high school, when I was like 16 years old, before I moved to Los Angeles, before I went to film school. And it has each week like these, steps you take to sort of recover your creativity. If maybe you had a difficult, childhood or certain blockages that may have come up, psychologically to creating. And so I really find that book to be so powerful. And the two main tools she teaches in that book are, number one, writing morning pages. So what morning pages are, if you've never done it before, is every morning when you wake up, the intention is to write 3 pages by hand, pure stream of consciousness, pages you'll never show to anyone, you're just going to throw away or put in, a binder that goes in a closet somewhere. You're never going to show it to anyone. So it really helps to kind of, I think she describes it sort of as this scrubbing clean of the subconscious and just sort of opening up the creative channel. And then it's interesting what else can kind of come from that, right? So I used to do that a ton when I was younger. I don't do the morning pages as much these days. I don't find I need that particular tool as much as I need the artist dates. And the artist dates are the other main tool that she recommends. And what that is it's just taking yourself on a date somewhere inspiring to you. And it could be as intense as like booking a trip somewhere like Tokyo, or it could be as simple as walking down the street and going to your local craft store and getting some finger paints and some stickers, things like that, where you're just sort of seeing where your inner artist wants to take you. Sometimes it's going to a museum, or sometimes it's just watching an old film. It can really be whatever you want it to be, but it's having this very intentional weekly, she says, date with your inner artist. And that particular tool I find to be so important for me. If I'm just in the house writing day after day, that's great for a few days. And then I need to go have an excursion somewhere. I'm really getting to know this about myself. So the beautiful thing about where I live now is that we've been going on these really beautiful day trips lately. So we went on a day trip to this little village in Tuscany. I can't say the name of this little village, so I'm going to put it in my Google Translate for you so it's said properly.
San Gimignano.
San Gimignano. There we go. San Gimignano. And that was just really beautiful and tranquil. I'm sort of loving these little like villages in Tuscany that are maybe lesser known, but that are idyllic and just not very crowded. So we went on a day trip there. And then when I was in the Modern Art Museum, I was getting excited about painting again. So I went to this really cute little art supply store in Florence called Zecchi Colori Bell Arts. And it's this really old paint shop. And I think a lot of the great artists used to go to this little shop, rumor has it. So I was really excited. Like, I want to go to the paint shop that, you know, these artists who have created beautiful work have gone to before. And I just went and I got a bunch of supplies and a sketchbook. And I just got excited to start painting again. And I started sketching, and I sketched out a painting that I'm working on now. And it's actually based on this woman that I saw randomly on the street one day, and she just had such an interesting look to her, and something artistically sparked in me. And so I got all these paints, and I have all my supplies, and I sketched out what I want to paint, and now I'm just excited to find the right day to bring that painting to life. But things like that have just been happening for me more and more naturally as I've just been listening to my intuition and seeing what inspires me and how do I fill my creative well so that I feel excited and inspired to create. So that's a little update about what's been going on with me creatively, and I would love to hear from you what you're inspired by lately, and also what you want to see more of on this channel and on this podcast, because I really want to create content that excites you, that serves you. And so let me know what you'd like to see more of. Leave a comment below, and I will talk to you soon.